The squared circle celebrates larger-than-life heroes who seem immortal under the spotlight. But beyond the pyro and roaring crowds lies a darker reality. The alarming number of wrestlers who left this world far too soon, often in circumstances as dramatic as their in-ring personas. Behind the glamour and spectacle lies a troubling pattern of sudden tragedies, preventable accidents, and stars pushed to their breaking points. Many of these deaths sparked controversy that rocked the wrestling world, from questions about industry practices to cover-ups from promotions desperate to protect their image. The bodies left behind raised uncomfortable questions that the billion-dollar wrestling empire would rather leave unanswered. Join us as we pull back the curtain on wrestling's darkest secrets. First up, Paul Orndorff. Paul Orndorff was one of Hulk Hogan's greatest rivals during the Golden Era. He went from being a standout football player to becoming Mr. Wonderful, the man who headlined the first WrestleMania. But after years of sacrifices and concussions, the effects of CTE would take their toll on Mr. Wonderful. And in 2021, doctors gave Paul devastating news. His time was running out. In 1949, Paul Parlett Orndorff Jr. was born in Brandon, Florida. The Orndorff were a working-class family. Every dollar came from hard work and long hours, something young Paul learned early on. While other kids in Brandon might have dreamed of easy success, Paul's childhood taught him that nothing comes without effort. Picture Tampa in the 1950s and 60s, hot summer days and Friday night lights. But the star who would later dominate wrestling rings started as the smallest kid on the block. Young Paul Orndorff wasn't born with natural size or strength, but he had something more powerful: pure grit that ran bone deep. When Paul first stepped onto a football field, it wasn't just about playing a game. He'd be the first to arrive at practice and the last to leave, turning the Florida sun into his personal training partner. While his classmates saw practice as something to get through, Orndorff saw it as something serious. He attacked the weight room like a man possessed, treating every rep like it was his last. Teachers and coaches would often find him running extra drills alone, long after everyone else had gone home. The other players started noticing something different about Paul. He was smaller, but he hit harder, ran faster, and simply wanted it more than anyone else. The New Orleans Saints picked Paul Orndorff in the 1973 NFL Draft. The Saints thought they had found a player who could do it all. But Paul was starting to hear the call of the wrestling ring, even as he practiced with the NFL. The path wasn't straightforward. He tried playing for the Chicago Bears, but things didn't click. When he got hurt playing in the World Football League, some might have seen it as bad luck. But really, these setbacks were just pushing Paul toward what he was meant to do. Everything changed when his father-in-law helped him get into wrestling. In 1976, fans at Mid-Southern Wrestling saw Paul for the first time. He didn't start small. He went right after the biggest name there, Jerry Lawler. It was like lighting a fire in the arena, and Paul knew he had found his place. Just a year later, in 1977, Paul was already wearing championship gold. Winning the NWA Southern Heavyweight Championship showed everyone that he wasn't just some football player trying to wrestle. He was a natural star. When he moved to wrestle in the tri-state area, he found himself fighting the mighty Ernie Ladd. They had amazing matches, and Paul even won the North American Heavyweight title twice. What made Paul special wasn't just that he could wrestle, it was how fast he got good at it. While most new wrestlers took years to learn, Paul seemed to know what to do right away. He wasn't just good at wrestling, he was changing it, helping create a new era in the sport that would last for years to come. In his early wrestling days, Paul became a star in the National Wrestling Alliance. His fights with the masked superstar were so fierce, people started calling him the Brandon Bull, remembering his football days. By 1979, he was on top of the world, winning the World Tag Team titles with Jimmy Snuka. He kept winning in Southeast Championship Wrestling too, taking tag team gold with partners Dick Slater and Norville Austin. The year 1980 saw Paul make Mid-South territory his home, and that's where he really caught fire. He had a wild rivalry with Ken Mantell that ended with someone losing their hair. Then he shocked everyone by turning bad after Jake the Snake Roberts won the North American title that Paul wanted so badly. But Paul got his way in the end. On July 4, 1981, he won that title himself. His time as champion wasn't quiet. He fought some of the biggest names around. The $1 Million Man and Dusty Rhodes gave him some of his toughest fights. But it all went south when his friend Bob Roop stabbed him in the back. Their friendship turned into one of the nastiest fights in Mid-South, and by early 1982, Paul had had enough. He packed his bags and left Mid-South behind, ready for something bigger. The thing about Paul was that he didn't just wrestle matches. He told stories in the ring. Every fight meant something. Every title had a purpose. When he was a good guy, fans loved him. When he turned bad, they hated him just as much. He could make people feel something just by walking into the arena. His matches with the $1 Million Man weren't just wrestling. They were like watching a movie where you didn't know who would win. Those years taught Paul everything he needed to know about being a star. He learned how to work a crowd, how to make people care, and most importantly, how to leave them wanting more. Each territory he wrestled in made him better, smarter, and more ready for the bright lights that were coming his way. Little did anyone know, but Paul Orndorff was just getting started. Paul's return to Georgia Championship Wrestling lit up the whole territory. His fights with Buzz Sawyer were so intense that when he finally won the National Heavyweight Championship, the fans went wild. He even gave up the title for a shot at Ric Flair's World Championship. That's how badly he wanted to be the best. When that didn't work out, Paul came back for his old title. He had crazy matches with the Super Destroyer and the Masked Superstar, trading the belt back and forth. But then Larry Zbyszko played dirty, using Killer Tim Brooks in a sneaky plan that cost Paul his championship. Looking for new fights and bigger crowds, Paul headed to Japan in 1983. There, he took on the best wrestlers Japan had, guys like Riki Choshu and the legendary Antonio Inoki. He even teamed up with the giant Big John Studd, making quite a name for himself overseas. Then came the moment that would change everything. Paul walked into the World Wrestling Federation. But he wasn't just another new guy trying his luck. He was Mr. Wonderful now, full of confidence and swagger. On January 23, 1984, he stepped into Madison Square Garden, the most famous arena in wrestling, and beat Salvatore Bellomo. Just like that, Paul Orndorff was a main event star. What made this time special wasn't just the wins, it was how Paul carried himself. He wasn't playing a character anymore. He had become something larger than life. Every time he walked to the ring, fans knew they were seeing someone special. The way he moved, talked, and fought, it all screamed superstar. That first match at the Garden wasn't just a win. It was Paul Orndorff announcing to the world that he had arrived at the top of wrestling, and he wasn't going anywhere. When Paul stepped into the WWF ring, he wasn't just wrestling. He was putting on a show. Every move he made told a story, and when he grabbed the microphone, people couldn't look away. His biggest early story came when he teamed up with Rowdy Roddy Piper, and that's where everything changed. It was Piper who first called him Mr. Wonderful, a name that would stick forever. Together, they weren't just bad guys. They were the kind of villains that fans secretly loved, even while booing them. Then came the big one, a match that would change wrestling forever. Paul and Piper took on the biggest stars around, the famous actor Mr. T and the mighty Hulk Hogan at the very first WrestleMania. This wasn't just another wrestling match in some small town. This was Hollywood meets wrestling, with celebrities everywhere and millions watching. Wrestling was growing up, becoming something bigger than it had ever been before. Every time Paul and Piper showed up, they got under people's skin in the best way. They weren't just wrestlers being mean, they were artists playing their parts perfectly. When they walked down the aisle at WrestleMania, they knew they were part of something special. This match wasn't just about winning or losing, it was about showing the world that wrestling could be as big as any other entertainment. What made Paul and Piper so good together was how real they felt. While Hogan and Mr. T were like superheroes, Paul and Piper were like the cool bad guys in a movie. They dressed sharp, talked smart, and made people want to see them get beaten up, but also secretly hoped they'd show up again next week. They weren't just wrestling bad guys anymore. They were helping turn wrestling into the huge show business it would become. That first WrestleMania match helped change everything about wrestling. It brought in new fans, made wrestling cool, and showed that a wrestling show could be as big as any movie or concert. And right in the middle of it all was Paul Orndorff, playing his part perfectly as Mr. Wonderful, helping turn wrestling into something wonderful indeed. The famous WrestleMania match came down to one wild moment. Bob Orton, who was supposed to help Paul win, messed everything up. He tried to hit Hogan with his cast but hit Paul instead. That one mistake let Hogan pin Paul for the win, and everything fell apart after that. Paul was burning mad about losing, but things got even worse. On Saturday night's main event, one of wrestling's biggest TV shows back then, Piper and Orton turned on him. They jumped him and beat him down, thinking they'd taught him a lesson. But they didn't know Paul Orndorff very well. Because later that same night, when they were beating up Hulk Hogan 2-on-1, something amazing happened. The crowd went crazy when Paul's music hit. He ran to the ring like a man on fire, but this time he wasn't after Hogan. He was coming to save him. Nobody could believe their eyes. The man who had been one of wrestling's biggest bad guys was now standing side by side with its biggest hero. The fans went wild, and just like that, Mr. Wonderful had gone from villain to hero in one unforgettable night. This wasn't just another wrestling story. It was like watching someone change right before your eyes. One minute, Paul was the guy everyone hated. The next, he was the guy they couldn't stop cheering for. The way he ran down that aisle, the look in his eyes, the way he fought off his old friends. It all felt real. Because with Paul Orndorff, even when the story was bigger than life, he made you believe every second of it. That night showed what made Paul special. He could make you hate him one minute and cheer him the next, and both felt just as real. His switch from bad guy to good guy wasn't just another wrestling turn. It was the start of one of the biggest stories wrestling would ever tell. When Paul finally broke away from Bobby Heenan, everyone knew things were really changing. It wasn't just another wrestling moment. Paul had picked his side, and he was sticking with it. Now he was fighting alongside Hulk Hogan, the biggest good guy in wrestling, and fans couldn't get enough. Paul and Hogan became an unstoppable team, traveling all over America to fight Piper and Orton. Every city they visited turned into a battleground. While Hogan had to defend his championship against other challengers, Paul took it upon himself to handle both Piper and Orton one-on-one. These weren't just normal matches. They were all-out wars that often ended with both guys still wanting to fight more. The fans who used to hate Paul now couldn't cheer loud enough for him. Every time he hit his finishing move, the piledriver, the buildings would shake with excitement. What made these fights special wasn't just who won or lost. It was how personal everything felt. When Paul fought Piper or Orton, you could feel the bad blood between them. These weren't just wrestlers doing moves. They were telling stories of betrayal and revenge. Night after night, city after city, Paul proved he belonged at the top of wrestling. He wasn't just Hogan's friend. He was a star in his own right. The way he carried himself had changed too. Instead of bragging about being Mr. Wonderful, he was showing it in the ring. He still had that swagger, but now he was using it to fire up the crowd instead of making them angry. This time in Paul's career showed just how good he really was. He could fight the biggest names in wrestling and look like he belonged. Whether he was teaming with Hogan or fighting on his own, Paul Orndorff had become one of wrestling's most popular stars, and he did it by being exactly who he was: wonderful. When Paul fired Bobby Heenan, he made a dangerous enemy. Heenan was so mad he offered $25,000 to anyone who could take Paul out. When nobody could do it, he doubled it to $50,000. That's when wrestling legend Bruno Sammartino stepped in as a referee to keep things fair. But when Piper and Orton started picking fights with Bruno too, he joined forces with Paul, making their battles even bigger. Paul wasn't just fighting Heenan's guys. He was also teaming up with the massive Andre the Giant and taking on tough guys like Don Morocco. But something else was eating at Paul. People started calling him Hulk Jr. Adrian Adonis kept making fun of him, saying he'd gone soft since becoming Hogan's friend. The breaking point came when Paul tried to call Hogan on TV, but Hogan was too busy training to talk. Paul started acting different after that. When he and Hogan were supposed to fight the Moondogs together, Paul wanted to prove he could do it alone. He didn't need Hogan's help. Then came the match that changed everything. Fighting Big John Studd and King Kong Bundy, Paul and Hogan bumped into each other. Paul got hurt and had to leave for a while. When he came back, nobody knew what to expect. Paul walked down to the ring like nothing had changed. Then, in a moment nobody will ever forget, he turned on Hogan. One big clothesline and then his famous pile driver. Just like that, Paul Orndorff had shocked the wrestling world. All those people calling him Hulk Jr. had finally pushed him too far. That moment wasn't just about Paul turning heel again. It was about him standing up and saying he was his own man. He didn't need to be Hogan's friend to be a star. He was Mr. Wonderful Paul Orndorff, and he was done living in anybody's shadow. The way he did it, the surprise, the violence, the perfect timing, showed why Paul was one of the best at telling stories in the ring. Paul's fights with Hulk Hogan weren't just wrestling matches. They were some of the best stories ever told in the ring. While Hogan was the all-American hero in his red and yellow, telling kids to say their prayers and eat their vitamins, Paul was showing a different side of success. He was the guy who thought he was better than everyone else and wasn't afraid to prove it. When these two fought, it felt personal. It wasn't just about who was stronger. It was about Paul being sick of living in Hogan's shadow. Every time they locked up, you could feel years of built-up anger coming out. Paul wanted to prove he didn't need Hogan's friendship to be a star. He wanted to show that Mr. Wonderful was every bit as good as the mighty Hulk Hogan. Their matches told a story that any fan could understand: jealousy, betrayal, and pride. When Paul hit Hogan with that clothesline and pile driver, it wasn't just another wrestling move. It was him saying, "I'm not your sidekick anymore." The fans who used to cheer both men now had to pick sides, and the buildings would shake with boos and cheers whenever they fought. What made these matches special was how real they felt. Every punch, every move, every time they stared each other down, you could feel the heat between them. Paul wasn't just another bad guy for Hogan to beat. He was someone who knew all Hogan's moves, who had fought beside him, and now wanted to prove he could beat him. This wasn't just good guy versus bad guy. It was about two of the biggest stars in wrestling going all out to prove who was better. Paul showed that being wonderful didn't mean being nice. It meant being the best, no matter who you had to beat to prove it. Their rivalry became one of wrestling's greatest stories because both men made you believe every second of it. The year 1986 marked a big change in how Paul showed up in the ring. He wasn't just a simple bad guy anymore. He became something more interesting. Some nights he'd be the villain everyone hated, other nights he'd be the tough guy fans couldn't help but cheer for. This was new for wrestling back then, when most wrestlers were either pure good guys or pure bad guys. Paul started doing things that made fans think twice about booing him. Even when he was being mean, he had his reasons that made sense. When he'd grab the microphone, he wouldn't just yell about how great he was. He'd tell the crowd why he did what he did. He made people understand him, even if they didn't agree with him. In the ring, every match was like watching a different chapter of Paul's story. Sometimes he'd cheat to win and act proud of it. Other times he'd fight fair and tough, showing he could beat anyone straight up if he wanted to. The way he carried himself, that Mr. Wonderful swagger, stayed the same, but now it meant different things at different times. This made his matches more exciting because you never knew which Paul would show up. He might be the sneaky villain one week, then the misunderstood tough guy the next. Each fight felt different from the last, but they all fit together in the bigger story of who Paul Orndorff was becoming. What made this so special was how ahead of its time it was. While other wrestlers were stuck playing the same character every night, Paul was showing that wrestling could be more like a TV show, with characters that changed and grew. He wasn't just wrestling matches anymore. He was helping change how wrestling told its stories. The late 1980s brought Paul his toughest fight yet, but this time it wasn't in the ring. A bad neck injury had him facing something every wrestler fears: the end of their career. For a guy who built his life around being physically perfect, this hit especially hard. Some thought Mr. Wonderful might be done for good. But Paul tackled rehab the same way he tackled everything else, with pure determination. The same drive that got him through football practice in Tampa, that pushed him to become a wrestling champion, now went into healing his body. Every day was like training for the biggest match of his life, except his opponent was his own injury. When he came back to wrestling, fans saw something different in him. Sure, he was still Mr. Wonderful, still had that confident strut to the ring, but now there was something more. He was proving that nothing could keep him down. Every move he made told the crowd, "I'm still here. I'm still strong." His matches became more than just fights. They were proof that you could bounce back from anything. The way Paul fought through his injury inspired other wrestlers too. Here was one of the toughest guys in the business, showing that even the biggest stars could get hurt, but also showing how to fight back. Even with a bad neck, Paul kept pushing forward. He changed how he wrestled to protect himself, but never lost that fire that made him special. As the 1990s rolled in, wrestling wasn't the same business Paul had started in. The WWF was becoming huge, like a TV show that played all over the world. So Paul headed back to WCW, where he could still be Mr. Wonderful his way. He got into some hard-hitting fights with wild men like Cactus Jack and battled young stars like Dustin Rhodes, showing he could still go with anybody. But Paul was more than just another wrestler now. He was living history. He was one of the last guys around who knew what it was like when wrestling was split into territories, when you had to drive town to town making your name. He'd been there when wrestling was changing from a local attraction into something that played on TV screens worldwide. When fans watched Paul wrestle in the 90s, they weren't just seeing another match. They were watching someone who helped build the wrestling business they now loved. In his matches with younger stars, Paul wasn't just trying to win. He was teaching them what he'd learned over the years. Every hold, every move, every way he worked the crowd came from years of experience. The new guys might have been faster or flashier, but Paul knew things about wrestling that you can only learn the hard way, night after night in rings across the country. Paul Orndorff was like a walking wrestling history book, someone who'd seen it all, done it all, and could still show the young guys how it was done. In 2011, Paul faced his toughest fight yet when doctors told him he had throat cancer. They didn't give him much time, just days to live. Even with a feeding tube keeping him alive, Paul wasn't ready to give up. Just like all those times in the ring, he refused to stay down. When he announced in August that his cancer was gone, it seemed like Mr. Wonderful had pulled off one last amazing comeback. But some battles can't be won with just heart and determination. Over the years that followed, Paul started fighting dementia, a fight that slowly takes away who you are, bit by bit. In 2021, a surprising story unfolded about Paul Orndorff that showed how even wrestling's biggest stars could fall on hard times. It started simply enough. A fan shared a GoFundMe page on Turnbuckle Magazine's Facebook. The page had been set up by Paul's son Travis, asking for help with his father's medical bills. The news shocked many wrestling fans. Paul Orndorff had been a main event star in the 1980s, fighting in the biggest matches and biggest arenas. He'd headlined shows with Hulk Hogan when wrestling was exploding in popularity. If you'd asked fans back then to guess which wrestlers might need financial help later in life, almost nobody would have picked Mr. Wonderful. But this showed a harsh truth about wrestling in those days. Even though Paul had been on top, even though he'd helped make wrestling huge, the money didn't last forever. Medical bills, especially for aging wrestlers whose bodies had taken years of punishment, could eat through savings quickly. The same man who once fought in front of thousands now needed help from those same fans in a different way. Fans started sharing Travis's GoFundMe everywhere. The wrestling community, known for taking care of its own, began spreading the word. This wasn't just about helping an old wrestler. This was about helping Mr. Wonderful, someone who'd given his body and his health to entertain fans for years. The campaign showed how wrestling had changed too. In the old days, when a wrestler needed help, it would happen quietly, maybe through other wrestlers or small fan clubs. But social media let Travis reach out to wrestling fans everywhere, showing them that even someone as wonderful as his dad could need their help sometimes. When the GoFundMe campaign details came out, they painted a heartbreaking picture. Paul Orndorff, Mr. Wonderful himself, was 3 years behind on his property taxes and needed help buying medicine. Even worse, if he couldn't pay those taxes by September, he'd lose his home to the bank. Many fans couldn't believe it at first. Paul was known for being smart with his money, not someone who'd waste the millions he made wrestling. But then the real story came out through Brian, who explained what had drained Paul's savings. It wasn't bad spending or poor choices. It was the brutal cost of fighting stage 4 lymph node cancer. The same toughness that made Paul a wrestling star had helped him beat cancer against the odds. But the medical bills had taken everything he had. This was more than just another sad wrestling story. Here was a man who'd done everything right, saved his money, invested wisely, planned for the future. But cancer didn't care about any of that. The cost of staying alive had eaten through savings that should have lasted a lifetime. The same Paul Orndorff, who once main evented WrestleMania, was now at risk of losing his home. The situation showed a harsh truth about life in America. Even being a smart, successful star didn't protect you from medical bills that could take everything. The man who'd helped make wrestling a million-dollar business was finding out that in the real world, even millions might not be enough when serious illness strikes. For fans, this wasn't just about helping an old wrestler anymore. It was about helping someone who'd been smart with his money but got hit with something nobody could really prepare for. Mr. Wonderful needed help. Not because he'd failed, but because sometimes life throws something at you that's tougher than any opponent in the ring. The wrestling world jumped into action as soon as they heard about Paul's situation. Social media lit up with shares and retweets. Big names in wrestling like Hurricane Helms, Gerald Briscoe, and Rip Rogers helped spread the word. It wasn't just talk. People were opening their wallets to help Mr. Wonderful. The campaign that had only raised $640 suddenly took off like a rocket. Over 200 people stepped up to donate, most of them being regular fans who remembered Paul's matches. But some of wrestling's biggest stars pitched in too. Dallas Page, known for helping other wrestlers in need, contributed. Chris Jericho, one of modern wrestling's biggest stars, showed up to help. Even Afa Anoa'i from the legendary Samoan wrestling family joined in. What happened next was like something out of a feel-good movie. In just over 24 hours, fans and wrestlers together blew past the $10,000 goal. It showed something special about wrestling fans. They don't forget the stars who entertained them. Sure, they might boo the bad guys and cheer the good guys during shows, but when one of their heroes needed real help, they came together like family. The speed of it all was amazing. In about a day, they went from Paul possibly losing his home to having enough money to save it. Social media, which can often be a tough place, turned into a rally point for helping someone who'd given so much to wrestling. The same fans who once watched Paul battle Hulk Hogan were now fighting alongside him against a different kind of opponent. This wasn't just fans helping an old wrestler. It was the wrestling community showing what they're really made of. When one of their own needed help, whether they were wonderful or not, the wrestling family stepped up to the plate. When the money came in, the first thing it did was save Paul's home by paying off those back taxes. But the help meant more than just keeping a roof over his head. It also meant Paul could get the medicine he needed as he kept fighting health problems. The cancer he'd beaten had left him with memory issues, and things got even tougher when doctors found signs of CTE, brain damage that many old wrestlers deal with from years of taking hits to the head. Brian Blair, who knew Paul well, shared some bittersweet news about his friend. "He's healthy," Blair said, talking about how amazed everyone was that Paul beat stage 4 cancer when they thought they might lose him. But beating cancer came with a price. It put extra stress on his brain, which was already dealing with damage from all the concussions he'd taken in the ring. The doctors had found something called tau in Paul's brain, a sign that shows up in people with CTE. It explained a lot about his memory problems. But even with these challenges, they weren't giving up. They were working on getting his medicine right, hoping that upping the dose might help his memory, since his body was still strong, even if his mind was struggling. It was a tough situation. Here was Paul Orndorff, who'd beaten cancer against all odds, still fighting hard like he always did. His body was winning battles, but his mind was fighting a different kind of match, one caused by all those years of entertaining fans in the ring. The money fans raised wasn't just paying bills, it was giving Mr. Wonderful a chance to keep fighting, to stay in his home, and to get the help he needed for both his body and his mind. The whole thing showed something important. The same tough spirit that made Paul Mr. Wonderful in the ring was still there, still fighting, still refusing to give up, even when the fights got harder and the opponents weren't something you could see in the ring. What started as an emergency effort to save Paul's home turned into something even better. While the GoFundMe money helped pay off what he owed, his family did something really smart. They fought for and won a tax exemption. This wasn't just a quick fix. It was a long-term solution that cut his future property taxes by 75%. This big drop in his tax rate meant the money fans donated would stretch much further than anyone first thought. The funds raised wouldn't just save his home for now. They'd keep Paul's home safe for the next 4 years under this new, lower tax rate. What started as a crisis turned into stable ground for Mr. Wonderful to stand on. The family's work in getting this tax exemption showed the same kind of fighting spirit Paul was famous for. They didn't just solve today's problem. They looked ahead and found a way to make tomorrow better, too. Instead of needing another fundraiser next year, Paul could rest easier knowing his home was secure for years to come. This wasn't just about money anymore, it was about giving Paul peace of mind. After all his health battles, after beating cancer and dealing with CTE, at least he wouldn't have to worry about losing his home. The wrestling community hadn't just helped their hero once. Thanks to this tax break, their help would keep protecting Paul for years. The whole story, from the urgent call for help to the long-term solution, showed how the wrestling world takes care of its own. Fans and fellow wrestlers didn't just throw money at a problem. They helped give Mr. Wonderful something wonderful, the security of knowing his home was safe for years to come. But even with all the love and support from fans who rallied to help him keep his home and get his medicine, Paul Orndorff's final battle came to an end on July 12, 2021. He was 71 years old. His last years showed the same fighting spirit that made him a wrestling legend. When cancer tried to take him down, he kicked out at 2.5, just like he'd done so many times in the ring. But dementia was different. It was an opponent that played by its own rules, one that even Mr. Wonderful couldn't overcome. The way Paul fought his health battles touched many people. Other wrestlers talked about how tough he was, fighting cancer when doctors had counted him out. Even in his final years dealing with dementia, he kept that spark that made him special. He might not have been the same Mr. Wonderful who lit up wrestling rings, but his courage never changed. In 2005, wrestling's biggest company gave Paul its highest honor, a spot in the WWE Hall of Fame. This wasn't just another award, it was proof that Mr. Wonderful had helped change wrestling forever. The fans who cheered and booed him over the years now stood to celebrate everything he'd given to the sport. Paul showed everyone that wrestling wasn't just about who won or lost. It was about telling stories that made people feel something real. When he strutted to the ring, flexing and calling himself Mr. Wonderful, he wasn't just showing off. He was showing what someone could become if they believed in themselves enough. From that small kid in Tampa to one of wrestling's biggest stars, Paul lived out a story of changing yourself into something greater. Every time Paul stepped into the ring, he taught fans and other wrestlers something important. Wrestling works best when it feels real. Whether he was Hogan's best friend or worst enemy, teaming with Piper or fighting him, Paul made you believe every second of it. He didn't just do moves, he made you care about why he was doing them. Up next, British Bulldog. Junkyard Dog was one of wrestling's most charismatic superstars, whose chain-wearing persona and infectious energy made him the first black wrestler to truly break wrestling's color barrier. He went from working in the Louisiana Territory to becoming one of the most popular wrestlers in America, filling arenas across the country with fans chanting his name. However, in 1998, on what should have been one of the happiest days of his life, his daughter's graduation, Junkyard Dog would fall asleep at the wheel and never wake up again. In 1952, Sylvester Ritter was born in the small town of Wadesboro, North Carolina. Ritter had dreams that had nothing to do with body slams or championship gold. Football was his first love, and he pursued it with the same intensity that would later make him a wrestling icon. At Fayetteville State University, Ritter wasn't just good, he was exceptional. His collegiate career culminated with honorable mention All-American honors, a testament to his natural athleticism and dedication. His performance was so impressive that the university would later induct him into their Sports Hall of Fame. Like many standout college athletes, Ritter had his sights set on professional football. In April 1976, that dream became reality when he signed with the Green Bay Packers. Here was his shot at NFL glory, the pinnacle of athletic achievement for any football player. But sometimes life has other plans. Within just 6 months, Ritter's football career was over before it truly began. Devastating knee and back injuries sent him from the practice field to the sidelines, and by October, the Packers had released him. In half a year, His lifelong ambition had crumbled. For many athletes, this kind of setback becomes the defining tragedy of their lives, the peak they never quite reached. But for Ritter, it was just the beginning of an unexpected journey. With his football dreams destroyed, Ritter needed a new path. Professional wrestling, with its combination of athleticism and showmanship, offered an alternative route. But breaking into the business wasn't easy. His early days in the ring were marked by uncertainty as he cycled through forgettable personas like Leroy Rochester and Big Daddy with audiences. The turning point came when he ventured north to Calgary's notorious Stampede Wrestling promotion. Under the punishing tutelage of Stu Hart, whose basement dungeon training facility was infamous for breaking down even the toughest athletes, Ritter began transforming from failed football player to legitimate wrestler. The Hart training system was brutal but effective, teaching wrestlers not just moves, but survival. Despite the harsh conditions, Ritter thrived in Calgary. His talent quickly became apparent as he captured the North American Championship twice, a sign that promoters saw something special in this athletic newcomer. These formative years in Stampede Wrestling weren't just about collecting accolades, they were about learning the psychology of wrestling, how to tell stories in the ring, and how to make fans care about the person behind the performance. While Ritter was developing his craft in Canada, a wrestling visionary named Bill Watts was building his Mid-South wrestling territory in Louisiana. Watts had been searching for someone who could challenge wrestling's unwritten racial rules, someone with enough charisma to transcend the industry's deeply entrenched biases. When Grizzly Smith, one of Watts' associates, spotted Ritter performing in Stampede Wrestling, he immediately recognized the raw potential in the former football player. What caught Watts' attention wasn't just Ritter's impressive physique or his growing in-ring skills. It was something far rarer and more valuable: natural charisma that connected with audiences on a visceral level. Here was a performer who could potentially redraw the industry's racial boundaries through sheer force of personality. Despite initial struggles to find the right presentation, Ritter's magnetic presence was undeniable. Charisma alone wouldn't make a wrestling superstar. It needed the perfect character to channel it through. What happens when you take raw talent, add a dog collar and chain, then blast queens, another one bites the dust through arena speakers? You get a cultural phenomenon that would shatter wrestling's racial barriers forever. Bill Watts was a visionary when it came to character creation. He saw Ritter's potential and transformed him into the Junkyard Dog, complete with a dog collar, chain, and initially, a cart filled with junk that he'd push to the ring. This wasn't just another wrestling gimmick. It was a complete reimagining of what a wrestling character could be. The presentation was jarring at first. Fans weren't immediately sure what to make of this unusual sight. But everything changed with the music. In an era when entrance themes weren't yet standard practice, Watts made the revolutionary decision to have Junkyard Dog enter arenas to Queen's "Another One Bites the Dust." The moment those iconic bass notes hit, crowds went wild. The song became inseparably linked to his character, creating an electric atmosphere before he even stepped into view. This wasn't just background noise. It was an extension of his personality that signaled something special was about to happen. In the ring, Ritter didn't rely on technical wrestling prowess. His style was straightforward but effective, showcasing his incredible strength and physicality. Those thunderous headbutts became his signature, along with a power game that let him body slam opponents much larger than himself. What he lacked in technical finesse, he more than made up for with raw power and charisma that captivated audiences. What truly made Junkyard Dog special wasn't just his look or his music, it was how he connected with people. Black audiences finally saw themselves represented not as a stereotype or sideshow, but as the hero of the story. He wasn't positioned as the black wrestler. He was simply the top star who happened to be black. This subtle but crucial difference created an authentic connection with black fans who had never before seen themselves portrayed this way in wrestling. Yet his appeal wasn't limited by racial lines. White audiences cheered him just as fervently, drawn to his authentic charisma and everyman quality. In the racially charged atmosphere of the early 1980s South, this was nothing short of revolutionary. While society outside the arena might still be deeply divided, inside the building, Fans of all races united in their support for the Junkyard Dog. Children, this wasn't just good business. It expanded wrestling's appeal beyond the traditional adult male demographic to entire families. Suddenly, kids were begging their parents to take them to see the Junkyard Dog, transforming wrestling events from adult entertainment to family outings. Despite his imposing physical presence, Junkyard Dog managed to be relatable. His blue-collar character resonated with working-class fans who saw themselves in his no-nonsense approach. He wasn't portrayed as a superhero or larger-than-life character. He was the tough, hard-working underdog that everyday people could identify with. This accessibility made fans feel personally invested in his victories and setbacks. The results were undeniable. The Junkyard Dog became a drawing phenomenon, packing arenas across the Mid-South territory and breaking attendance records everywhere he went. In an industry where success is measured by tickets sold, Ritter proved that audiences would turn out in record numbers to see a black superstar in the main event, something many promoters had considered impossible just years earlier. Drawing massive crowds was impressive enough, but what happened next would push the boundaries of professional wrestling into genuinely dangerous territory. When Michael Hayes and the Fabulous Freebirds blinded the Junkyard Dog with hair cream in 1980, they couldn't have predicted that their storyline would spiral into one where their own safety would be at serious risk. This wasn't just another wrestling angle. The genius of Mid-South storytelling became evident when they added a heart-wrenching personal element. Junkyard Dog couldn't see his newborn daughter because of his blindness. That single detail transformed what might have been a standard wrestling feud into something that touched fans on a visceral, emotional level. The audience wasn't just watching a wrestling show anymore. They were witnessing an attack on a new father's most basic right to see his child. The fan reaction was unlike anything the territory had ever experienced. The Superdome in New Orleans became his fortress, his home turf, where justice would eventually be served. A staggering 28,000 fans packed the arena to witness Junkyard Dog's revenge against the Freebirds, numbers that would make even major sports franchises envious. But the real story wasn't just happening inside the ring. Outside the arena, the situation grew increasingly volatile. The Freebirds weren't just playing bad guys, they were becoming targets of genuine hatred. Michael Hayes later recalled the terrifying reality of that period. You would fight from the ring to the dressing room. It wasn't a question of where you're going to get your ass whipped. It was a question of if you were going to make it to the dressing room. That wasn't wrestling hyperbole. The Freebirds required actual police escorts just to safely exit venues, with officers forming human shields against crowds that weren't simply playing along with the show anymore. How dangerous did it get? In one chilling incident, security discovered a fan with a bullet that had Freebirds carved into it. This wasn't kayfabe or wrestling theater. This was a genuine threat that revealed just how completely the line between fiction and reality had disappeared. What started as entertainment had morphed into something that put performers in legitimate danger. For wrestlers accustomed to getting booed as part of their job, this level of genuine hatred was unprecedented. Every night became a gamble, every arena a potential powder keg. The Freebirds couldn't simply walk to their cars after shows. They needed protection plans and escape routes. Their gimmick had worked too well, creating an atmosphere where their physical safety was genuinely at risk. The storytelling reached its climactic moment in a steel cage dog collar match at the Superdome. The stipulation wasn't just for show. It represented the only way to contain the explosive tension that had built between these rivals. When Ritter emerged victorious, the release of emotion from the crowd was cathartic, a collective expression of justice finally being served. The match itself served as the perfect culmination of wrestling's unique power. A carefully crafted story that caused real emotional investment from thousands of fans. What made this feud so special wasn't just the box office success, though that was undeniable. It was how it demonstrated wrestling's unique ability to blur the boundaries between performance and reality. In an age before the internet exposed the inner workings of the business, fans weren't just suspending disbelief. They were fully invested in the storyline as if it were completely real. The Freebirds weren't playing villains. To those fans, they were villains who had committed an unforgivable act against a beloved hero. For the wrestling business, the Ritter-Freebirds feud proved something crucial. Emotional storytelling could drive attendance even more effectively than impressive moves or championship belts. It showed that wrestling at its best isn't just about athletic performances. It's about creating moments that connect with audiences on a human level. That human connection Ritter mastered in Mid-South would soon be tested on wrestling's largest platform. On August 10, 1984, Sylvester Ritter made the leap that forever altered his career trajectory, joining Vince McMahon's expanding World Wrestling Federation. The decision wasn't easy. In Mid-South, Ritter reigned as undisputed king, but McMahon's vision of national expansion promised something no territory could match: worldwide fame and financial security. When Ritter first walked down the aisle in a WWF arena, the response was electric. Fans who'd only heard rumors of this chain-wearing, head-butting sensation were finally seeing him in person. The Dog had arrived on wrestling's biggest stage, and audiences immediately embraced him. What nobody expected, though, was that despite drawing reactions that rivaled or sometimes exceeded those of Hulk Hogan himself, Ritter would find himself occupying a different position in McMahon's hierarchy. The disparity between fan reaction and positioning became apparent at the inaugural WrestleMania on March 31, 1985. Ritter squared off against Intercontinental Champion. While Ritter won the match by countout, he didn't capture the championship. This pattern would repeat throughout his WWF only significant WWF accolade, winning the Wrestling Classic tournament. This single-night elimination tournament should have been a launching pad toward greater heights, but instead, it stood as an isolated achievement in an otherwise mid-card career. The contrast between his star power and his positioning puzzled many wrestling observers. How could a performer who connected so profoundly with audiences remain confined to the middle of the card? Became a question asked by wrestling journalists and fans alike. The answer revealed much about McMahon's vision for his company. While Ritter possessed undeniable charisma, he didn't fit the physical prototype McMahon was building his company around. In the WWF's expanding national landscape, the heavily muscled superhero physique of Hulk Hogan represented the company's ideal champion. The marketing of Ritter itself underwent a transformation under McMahon's direction. In Mid-South, Bill Watts had presented the Dog as a physically imposing, tough-as-nails brawler who could withstand punishment and deliver devastating headbutts. The WWF version emphasized different qualities: his dancing, his smile, his interactions with young fans. While these elements had always been part of the Ritter character, they now became his primary identity rather than supplementary aspects of a dominant fighter. This isn't to say Ritter disappeared into obscurity. Far from it. He formed memorable partnerships with other beloved stars, particularly the legendary Andre the Giant. Together, they frequently battled the heel faction known as the Heenan family, creating entertaining segments that showcased his natural charisma and connection with the audience. These moments kept him relevant, even without championship gold. One of his most memorable WWF moments came at WrestleMania 3 on March 29, 1987, when he faced the Regal Harley Race. Though Ritter lost the match itself, the aftermath became iconic. He stole Race's royal crown and robe, parading around the ring as over 93,000 fans in the Pontiac Silverdome roared their approval. The moment perfectly encapsulated Junkyard Dog's WWF tenure. He might not win the big matches, but he always won the crowd. For nearly 4 years, Ritter remained one of the WWF's most reliable performers and merchandise sellers. Children adored him, adults respected him, and his entrance still brought crowds to their feet night after night. He consistently drew large audiences and was featured prominently on WWF programming, despite rarely contending for major championships. In wrestling's hierarchy, he occupied a unique position, not the company's standard-bearer, but unquestionably one of its most beloved personalities. The same arenas that echoed with cheers for the Junkyard Dog masked the sound of his personal world crumbling. Behind that infectious smile and energetic ring presence that brought thousands to their feet night after night, Sylvester Ritter was fighting a battle far more challenging than any wrestling match. And it was a battle he was losing. His struggle with substance abuse began in the early 1980s, a time when drug use was rampant throughout the professional wrestling industry. While fans witnessed his charismatic performances in the ring, few knew that cocaine had become his drug of choice outside of it. What started as recreational use gradually evolved into a full-blown addiction that would ultimately derail his career. The grueling schedule of 1980s wrestling created the perfect storm for substance abuse. Performers were expected to wrestle multiple times per week, often driving hundreds of miles between shows with little recovery time. Many turned to various substances, alcohol, painkillers, and cocaine, just to manage the physical toll and maintain their energy levels. Ritter wasn't immune to these pressures. As his dependence deepened, so did the impact on his in-ring work. The explosive athleticism that had once defined his performances began to fade. Training sessions became less frequent. His once reliable timing grew inconsistent. While his natural charisma still shone through, those closest to the business could see the decline. Perhaps most troubling were reports that Ritter wasn't just using substances himself, but introducing them to others. According to several accounts, he allegedly gave Iron Sheik his first experience with crack cocaine, a particularly damaging incident given Sheik's subsequent well-documented struggles with addiction. By 1988, his cocaine problem had become impossible for the WWF to ignore. Despite remaining a fan favorite who still moved merchandise and drew crowds, the company made the difficult decision to release him. His unreliability had simply become too great a liability for a company pushing toward mainstream acceptance. The chaos in his professional life mirrored the turmoil in his personal relationships. His first marriage ended in extraordinary circumstances that included a kidnapping incident and Ritter suffering a gunshot injury. His second divorce proved equally devastating, but in different ways, financially stripping him of nearly everything he owned. In the aftermath, he lost his home, his car, and most of his possessions, leaving the once proud superstar emotionally shattered and economically vulnerable. When Ritter arrived in World Championship Wrestling, WCW, later in 1988, fans initially had reason for optimism. He debuted at Clash of the Champions 4, immediately reigniting his feud with Butch Reed. The familiar intensity was there, at least initially, but something had changed. His movements were slower, his timing off. The physical toll of his lifestyle was increasingly evident. WCW positioned him for a high-profile program with the legendary Ric Flair, but these matches exposed Junkyard Dog's limitations rather than showcasing his strengths. What should have been dream matchups for fans instead became painful reminders that his best days were behind him. While he did capture championship gold as part of a six-man tag team with Tommy Rich and Ricky Morton, this brief success was followed by an unceremonious disappearance from television after they dropped the titles. As the 1990s progressed, the once mighty Junkyard Dog found himself working small, independent shows in high school gyms and community centers. The crowds numbered in the hundreds rather than thousands. The paychecks diminished accordingly. Yet those who saw him during this period noted that despite everything, his love for wrestling remained undiminished. The smile was still there, albeit now masking deeper pain. The connection with fans, especially children, remained genuine even as his physical capabilities continued to decline. Where once he had commanded top dollar and main event status, Ritter now took whatever bookings came his way, traveling the independent circuit into the mid-1990s. His name still carried enough recognition to draw curious fans, but the gap between the Junkyard Dog of legend and the man now performing in the ring grew wider with each passing year. While crowds dwindled and bookings diminished, there was one role Sylvester Ritter never stopped performing with pride: being a father. On June 2, 1998, Ritter made the journey to North Carolina for his daughter LaToya's high school graduation. After years of struggling in small-town venues, this moment represented something genuine: watching his child accomplish what he could be truly proud of. But what should have been a celebration would instead mark the final chapter in the story of the Junkyard Dog. The graduation ceremony went perfectly. Ritter beamed with pride as LaToya walked across the stage, diploma in hand. This wasn't kayfabe or a wrestling angle. This was real life, a father witnessing his daughter's achievement. The moment held special significance given how his most famous storyline had centered around this very same daughter years earlier, when the Freebirds blinding him had prevented him from seeing her as a newborn. After the celebration, Ritter began the long drive back to his home in Mississippi. The highways stretched endlessly before him as night fell. We'll never know exactly what happened in those final moments, whether fatigue set in after the emotional day, if he fell asleep momentarily, or if something else caused him to lose control. What we do know is that on Interstate 20 near Forest, Mississippi, his car suddenly veered off the road and slammed into a tree. The impact was devastating. At just 45 years old, Sylvester Ritter, the man who had body-slammed giants and electrified arenas across America, was killed instantly in the single-vehicle accident. The date was June 2, 1998, barely 24 hours after he'd watched his daughter graduate. News of his death sent shockwaves through the wrestling community. The man who had innovated entrance music, broken racial barriers, and connected with fans of all backgrounds was suddenly gone. Tributes poured in from across the industry as wrestlers who had shared locker rooms with the charismatic performer struggled to process the loss. The cruel irony wasn't lost on anyone. The man who had survived the brutal physical toll of professional wrestling for nearly 2 decades, who had endured countless bumps and bruises in rings across the country, had his life claimed not by the business but by a highway he'd traveled countless times before. The road that had taken him to so many wrestling venues had taken his life after what should have been one of his proudest personal moments. Perhaps most heartbreaking was what this revealed about the man behind the character. Far from the bright lights and roaring crowds, Ritter had been simply a father driving hundreds of miles to support his daughter's milestone achievement. In an industry where the line between character and performer often blurs, his final act was purely that of Sylvester Ritter the man, not Junkyard Dog, the wrestling persona. In death, as in his later career, indignities continued to follow Ritter. He was initially buried in an unmarked grave at Westview Memorial Park in Wadesboro, North Carolina. For over a decade, the final resting place of one of wrestling's most influential performers remained unmarked, until wrestling fans took action. In a testament to the lasting impact he had on audiences, fans raised money to provide Ritter with a proper grave marker, which was finally placed in November 2012, 14 years after his death. The circumstances surrounding LaToya weren't finished causing controversy either. Following Ritter's death, a wrestling promotion insensitively referenced her in a storyline, causing outrage among fans and industry insiders who felt it crossed ethical lines. Even in death, the business that had built him up wasn't above exploiting his memory and family connections. When Junkyard Dog was posthumously inducted into the WWE Hall of Fame in 2004, it was LaToya who accepted the honor on her father's behalf. Standing before an audience of wrestling royalty, she represented the human legacy of a performer whose impact had extended far beyond championship belts and arena attendance records. Championships don't tell the whole story. That Hall of Fame ceremony wasn't just another plaque on a wall. It was acknowledgement of a man who completely rewrote wrestling's unspoken racial rules. When LaToya Ritter accepted her father's WWE Hall of Fame induction in 2004, she represented something far greater than just another wrestling career. She stood as living proof of a revolution that had quietly transformed an entire industry. Despite this prestigious honor, many of today's wrestling fans have little understanding of just how profoundly Ritter changed the business. Before him, the idea of a black wrestler as the undisputed top attraction of a major territory was considered impossible. Ritter didn't just crack that ceiling, he shattered it completely, proving what industry veterans had deemed unthinkable: that audiences would pack arenas specifically to see a black superstar in the main event. The ripple effects of this breakthrough can be seen throughout modern wrestling. Stars like Booker T, Mark Henry, and even Dwayne "The Rock" Johnson have all cited Ritter as a critical influence in their careers. These weren't just token acknowledgments. They were recognition that Ritter had fundamentally altered what was possible for black performers in the industry. He wasn't just popular, he was transformative. That transformation continues today. When you see groups like The New Day enjoying massive popularity and merchandise success, you're witnessing his legacy in action. These performers have openly discussed how his pioneering work created the opportunities they now enjoy. Every time a black superstar steps out to headline a major event, literally had to fight to create. What made his impact so revolutionary wasn't just who he was, but how he connected with his audience. His approach to wrestling was fundamentally character-driven at a time when pure athleticism was still the primary focus. Ritter demonstrated that charisma and emotional connection could be more powerful drawing tools than technical wrestling skill. This philosophy would later become the cornerstone of wrestling's most successful era, as companies shifted from sport-focused presentations to character-driven entertainment. Perhaps most importantly, Ritter helped transform professional wrestling from an adult-oriented spectacle into family entertainment. His natural connection with children made wrestling accessible to audiences of all ages, expanding the demographic appeal of the entire industry. Long before WWE explicitly branded itself as family entertainment, Ritter was showing promoters the untapped potential of marketing to younger fans and their parents. What's remarkable about his influence is that he accomplished all this despite never winning a major world championship. In an industry obsessed with title reigns and championship lineages, Ritter proved that a wrestler's true impact can't be measured in gold belts alone. His merchandising popularity was astronomical, regularly selling out arenas like the New Orleans Superdome. Not because he was positioned as the champion, but because audiences genuinely connected with him as both a character and a person. Even decades after his tragic passing, tributes to Ritter continue throughout wrestling. Modern promotions regularly honor his contributions through storylines and special events, ensuring that his revolutionary impact isn't forgotten. The wrestling world recognizes that, without his groundbreaking success, the industry we know today might look dramatically different. His greatest achievement wasn't winning matches or championships. It was proving that wrestling fans would embrace performers based on their charisma and connection rather than their race. Before Ritter, industry wisdom claimed audiences wouldn't accept certain wrestlers in certain roles due to the color of their skin. Ritter didn't just prove that theory wrong, he made it look ridiculous in retrospect. His electrifying presence forced promoters to reconsider everything they thought they knew about audience preferences and marketing. More than 2 decades after his passing, Junkyard Dog's influence on professional wrestling continues to grow stronger. Modern wrestlers frequently cite Ritter as a direct inspiration for their careers, acknowledging the doors he opened for future generations. As WWE author Brian Shields noted, Ritter remains recognized as one of the most electrifying and charismatic wrestlers of his time, particularly during wrestling's transformative early 80s period. What truly measures a wrestler's impact isn't championship gold, but their lasting influence on the business itself. In 2012, wrestling fans demonstrated this truth when they funded a proper marker for Junkyard Dog's previously unmarked grave, placing it just before WrestleMania 20 as a profound gesture of respect. The tributes that continue pouring in from both fans and fellow wrestlers speak to something more meaningful than title reigns. In wrestling, true greatness isn't counted in championship belts, but in how you change the business forever. Ritter may have left us too soon, but his chain-wearing, barrier-breaking legacy lives on every time entrance music hits, every time demographics unite behind a charismatic performer. Up next, Jim Neidhart.
Jim Neidhart was one of wrestling's most intense characters, whose menacing laugh and powerhouse style made him the perfect tag team partner for Bret the Hitman Hart. He went from being a record-breaking shot-put athlete to becoming one of WWE's most memorable big men, throwing opponents around like ragdolls while rocking his iconic pink and black attire. However, in 2018, the Anvil would fall and never rise again. James Henry Neidhart was born on February 8, 1955 in Montebello, California. The first signs of his special talent showed up on his high school track field. Picture a young Jim walking up to throw the shot put with everyone watching quietly. What he did that day was amazing. He threw the shot put so far that he broke the California state record. His throw was so good that no one could beat it for 12 whole years at Newport Harbor High School. This wasn't just luck. Jim had the kind of raw strength that would make him famous later in life. But Jim's athletic ambitions initially led him down a different path. With his impressive strength and natural athleticism, the NFL came calling. In 1978, he found himself wearing the silver and black of the Oakland Raiders, a team known for taking chances on unique talents. When that door closed, another opened with the Dallas Cowboys. The football dream seemed within reach, but fate had other plans. Sometimes the most important moments in life come disguised as disappointments. While Jim's NFL career didn't materialize as he hoped, his remarkable physical prowess caught the eye of someone who would change his life forever. Wrestling promoter Stu Hart, a legendary figure in professional wrestling, saw something special in this powerful young athlete. Hart had an uncanny ability to spot diamond in the rough talent, and in Jim, he saw unlimited potential waiting to be unleashed in the wrestling ring. Those early years of shot-put competitions and football training weren't wasted time. His explosive strength, developed through years of athletic training, would soon find a new home in the world of professional wrestling, where raw power met showmanship in perfect harmony. Inside a Calgary basement, a place that would change wrestling forever, future stars learned their craft through pain and sweat. They called it the Hart Dungeon, and it wasn't your average wrestling school. When Stu Hart invited Jim to train there, no one knew this basement would completely change his life's path. The dungeon was brutal, and everyone knew it. Under the Hart family's house, wrestlers learned the hard way. Through real holds and genuine fighting moves, people in the neighborhood could hear yelling from that basement, and soon Jim's voice joined the mix. But while others just tried to survive the training, Jim actually got better and stronger. Yet Jim found more than just wrestling skills in Calgary. Between the tough training sessions with Stu Hart, he caught the eye of Stu's daughter Ellie. They clicked right away. Ellie knew wrestling inside and out. She'd watched her dad train wrestlers her whole life. They fell in love while Jim learned wrestling moves, their story playing out in the most unlikely of places. Their wedding in 1979 wasn't just about love. It joined Jim to wrestling's royal family. The strong guy from California was now part of the Hart clan, a family that had shaped wrestling for years and would keep doing so for many more. But getting married to Ellie would lead to something even bigger in Jim's wrestling career. Joining the Hart family opened doors Jim never expected. As he got better at wrestling and grew closer to the Harts, something big was brewing. A partnership that would shake up wrestling was just around the corner. Jim didn't know it yet, but his biggest moment in wrestling was coming, and it would change everything. At the legendary Calgary Stampede, Stu Hart saw a chance to turn his son-in-law into something special. The yearly festival wasn't just about cowboys and rides, it featured unique contests that celebrated raw strength. Among them was the Anvil toss, a challenge that would change Jim's wrestling identity forever. Stu pulled Jim aside with an offer that showed just how clever he was at building stars. $500 waited for Jim if he could not only compete in, but win the Anvil toss. In the 1970s, that kind of money turned heads. But more importantly, Stu knew a victory here would give Jim something priceless, a character that fans would never forget. The day of the competition arrived with the summer sun beating down on the Stampede grounds. As Jim stepped up to throw, the crowd grew quiet. The Anvil, weighing more than most men could lift, sat waiting. In a display of pure power that left spectators slack-jawed, Jim launched the massive piece of metal an incredible 11 feet, 2 inches through the air. The victory did more than just pad Jim's wallet, it gave birth to a wrestling identity that would stick with him for life. The Animal, his previous nickname, didn't quite capture what fans had just witnessed, but the Anvil, that told the whole story. It painted a picture of raw strength, blue-collar toughness, and the kind of power that could make even a seasoned strongman step back in awe. Stu's gamble paid off brilliantly. In one afternoon, Jim wasn't just another wrestler anymore, he was the Anvil, a name that would echo through wrestling arenas for years to come. The nickname fit him perfectly, capturing both his incredible strength and his connection to the hardy spirit of Calgary, a city built on grit and determination. In 1985, wrestling's landscape was changing fast, and one man stood at the center of it all: Vince McMahon. His World Wrestling Federation wasn't content staying regional anymore. Like a hungry shark, McMahon was swimming into new territories, gobbling up talent wherever he found it. And his eyes had locked onto two promising stars in Calgary. Jim and Bret Hart might have seemed like an odd match at first glance. One was a powerhouse who could toss anvils for fun, the other a technical master who could tie opponents in knots. But sometimes the best combinations are the ones that don't make sense on paper. McMahon saw something special in this unlikely duo, a perfect blend of power and precision that could revolutionize tag team wrestling. Enter Jimmy Hart, the megaphone-wielding manager known as the Mouth of the South. His addition to the mix was like throwing gasoline on an already hot fire. The decision to put him with Bret and Jim wasn't just smart, it was genius. Here was a mouthpiece who could rile up crowds while two of wrestling's finest talents did what they did best in the ring. The Hart Foundation wasn't just another tag team, they were a statement. In their pink and black gear, they stood out immediately. Jim's raw power complemented Bret's technical wizardry like peanut butter and jelly, creating a combination that would write their names in wrestling's history books. Looking back, it's clear that 1985 wasn't just another year in Jim's career. It was the moment everything changed. The Hart Foundation would go on to become one of wrestling's most decorated and remembered tag teams, proving that sometimes the best decisions in wrestling aren't just about individual talent, but about finding the perfect chemistry between partners. Inside the WWF's squared circle, something special was brewing. The Hart Foundation wasn't just another tag team, they were revolutionizing how tag team wrestling looked. When Bret Hart moved like a surgeon in the ring, carefully taking apart his opponents, Jim was there to shake the ropes and send them flying with explosive power. It was like watching a chess master team up with a wrecking ball. Their matches against the British Bulldogs wrote a new chapter in wrestling history. Davey Boy Smith and the Dynamite Kid weren't just opponents, they were the perfect rivals. All four men knew each other from the Hart Dungeon days, and it showed in the ring. These weren't just matches, they were violent ballet performances that left crowds breathless. Every lockup told a story, every counter-move had meaning, and when these teams clashed, magic happened. February 7th, 1987, that's when everything changed. On an episode of Superstars of Wrestling, the Hart Foundation finally struck gold. The night they took the tag team titles from the British Bulldogs wasn't just a victory, it was a coronation. The pink and black attack had arrived at the top of the mountain, and they weren't planning to leave anytime soon. For nearly a year, they dominated the tag team scene. The Killer Bees brought their quick strikes and double-team moves, but the Foundation had an answer. The young stallions charged in with youthful energy, only to be taught harsh lessons by the champions. Strikeforce thought they had the formula figured out, but Bret and Jim proved them wrong time and again. Each successful defense added new wrinkles to their game. Bret would soften up opponents with his technical mastery, while Jim stalked the ring like a caged animal, waiting to unleash his power. Their opponents never knew which was worse, getting caught in Bret's sharpshooter or being on the receiving end of Jim's devastating power slam. This wasn't just a championship reign, it was a masterclass in tag team wrestling that teams would study for generations to come. When the summer heat of 1988 rolled in, wrestling fans witnessed a clash of titans that shook the ring posts. Demolition wasn't just any tag team, they were walking wrecking machines in face paint and spikes. When they locked up with the Hart Foundation at SummerSlam, the ring could barely contain the explosion of power. Jim, refusing to back down, went chest to chest with axe and smash, proving he could throw down with wrestling's most feared powerhouses. But it was their battles with the Rockers that showed wrestling fans something they didn't expect. Shawn Michaels and Marty Jannetty moved like lightning and flew through the air like they had wings. Most big men would have been left in the dust, but Jim showed he had more tricks up his sleeve than anyone knew. The Anvil, all 280 pounds of him, adapted his style on the fly. He'd catch the Rockers mid-flight, turn their own momentum against them, yet still keep up with their fast-paced attack. These matches across 89 and 90 weren't just great wrestling, they were proof that Jim was something special. While other power wrestlers stuck to their usual playbook, Jim showed he could wrestle any style thrown at him. One night he'd be trading power moves with giants, the next he'd be catching high flyers and matching speed with wrestling's quickest stars. In the ring with the Rockers, Jim revealed layers to his wrestling that nobody saw coming. He didn't just rely on raw strength anymore, he showed timing, agility, and ring smarts that surprised everyone. When Michaels or Jannetty came flying off the top rope, the Anvil was ready with perfect positioning and split-second timing. These weren't just matches, they were showcases of how a true ring veteran could evolve and adapt. Through these feuds, the Anvil proved what old-school wrestling fans had always known. Size and power were just part of his arsenal. Whether it was surviving Demolition's assault or keeping pace with the Rockers' high-speed attacks, Jim showed that a true wrestling great could do it all. His ability to adapt while staying true to his power-based core made these matches classics that fans still talk about today. The wrestling world sizzled as the Hart Foundation's war with Jimmy Hart's crew reached fever pitch. Their old manager had become their worst enemy, and every match felt personal. At the '89 Royal Rumble, they found an unlikely partner in Jim Duggan, the patriotic powerhouse whose voice echoed through arenas. Together, they faced off against the ruthless combo of Dino Bravo and the Rougeau brothers in a match that had fans on their feet. 2 out of 3 Falls matches were wrestling's ultimate test of endurance and skill. It wasn't enough to get 1 pin. You needed 2. When the dust settled, the Hart Foundation and Duggan stood tall, proving that sometimes the good guys do win. The victory sent a message. The pink and black attack wasn't just surviving, they were thriving. WrestleMania 5 brought another challenge, the Honky Tonk Man and Greg Valentine. This wasn't just any match, this was wrestling's biggest stage. The Hart Foundation rose to the occasion, adding another win to their impressive record. But behind the scenes, changes were brewing. Both Bret and Jim were starting to eye something new, singles glory. House shows became testing grounds for both men's solo careers. While fans knew them as tag team specialists, these matches showed different sides of both wrestlers. Jim, in particular, caught everyone's attention. The Anvil wasn't content with just tag team success, he wanted more. His eyes locked onto Rick Rude's Intercontinental Championship, and suddenly, the powerhouse who'd made his name throwing anvils was hunting for singles gold. The matches against Rude showed a different side of Jim. The Ravishing One was known for his technical skill and ring psychology, forcing the Anvil to dig deep into his wrestling toolbox. These weren't just matches, they were proof that Jim could hang with the best singles competitors in the business. Every near fall and close call had fans believing the Anvil might just capture gold on his own. Los Angeles Sports Arena, WrestleMania 7, 1991. Wrestling's biggest night was about to turn ugly. A year earlier, the Hart Foundation had steamrolled the Bolsheviks in record time. But tonight they faced something different, the street-tough Nasty Boys, a team that didn't just bend the rules, they broke them with a smile. The match was like watching a car crash in slow motion. The Nasty Boys brought their garbage can style of wrestling, turning the ring into a war zone. Knobs and Sags weren't interested in technical wrestling, they wanted to hurt people. The Hart Foundation tried to keep it clean, showcasing their signature moves and teamwork, but sometimes nice guys finish last. When Jerry Sags pulled out that motorcycle helmet, everything changed. The referee was distracted, focusing on the wrong corner at exactly the wrong moment. The crack of metal on flesh echoed through the arena as the helmet connected with Jim's skull. The Anvil, for all his power and toughness, couldn't overcome physics and steel. He dropped like a stone. Brian Knobbs, grinning like a kid who'd just gotten away with stealing cookies, made the cover. The referee's hand hit the mat 3 times, and just like that, the Hart Foundation's reign was over. The Nasty Boys celebrated like they'd won clean, but everyone knew better. That motorcycle helmet had written a new chapter in tag team history, even if it wasn't the ending most fans wanted. This wasn't just any title change, it marked the end of an era. The Hart Foundation had carried the tag team division with class and skill. Now the belts sat around the waists of 2 brawlers who'd stolen them with a foreign object. Wrestling could be cruel that way, but sometimes the dirtiest players drew the biggest cards. The Los Angeles crowd sat in shocked silence, watching as the Nasty Boys paraded around with their ill-gotten gains, while Jim and Hart were left to pick up the pieces of their shattered championship dreams. The early 90s didn't just mark the end of the Hart Foundation's championship runs, they cemented their place as pioneers who changed tag team wrestling forever. Like master artists who left their mark on every canvas they touched, Bret and Jim had painted a new picture of what tag team wrestling could be. Watch any Hart Foundation match, and you'd see the blueprint they created. It wasn't just about Bret's technical wizardry or Jim's raw power anymore, it was the way they wove these elements together. When Jim would catch a flying opponent and turn them into a power slam, it wasn't just a move, it was poetry in pink and black. The way Bret would soften up an opponent's leg before the Anvil would come in to finish the job, that wasn't just strategy, it was storytelling that fans could feel in their bones. Those pink and black tights became more than just wrestling gear. In a world of neon colors and wild patterns, the Hart Foundation's look stood out by being sharp and professional. Every time they stepped through the curtain, they looked like they meant business. That image of professionalism and skill became their calling card, inspiring a whole generation of wrestlers to take their craft just as seriously. But perhaps their greatest gift to wrestling was their versatility. One night they could slug it out with powerhouses like Demolition. The next they could keep pace with high flyers like the Rockers. They proved that a great tag team didn't need to be one-dimensional. This adaptability set a new standard. To be the best, you had to be able to wrestle anyone, anywhere, any style. Years later, when fans would watch new tag teams rise through the ranks, they'd see pieces of the Hart Foundation's influence. The way teams worked together, timing of their moves, psychology of their matches, all of it carried echoes of what Bret Hart and Jim had built together. They hadn't just been champions, they'd been teachers, showing everyone who followed them what tag team wrestling could be. Inside the WWF's ever-changing landscape, Jim found himself at a crossroads after 1991. The Hart Foundation might have been done, but the Anvil wasn't finished. When he joined forces with Owen Hart, Bret's high-flying younger brother, fans got excited. Here was a fresh take on a winning formula, the power of the Anvil matched with Owen's incredible aerial skills. The new foundation hit the ground running with a fresh look and attitude, gone were the pink and black tights, replaced with a more colorful style that matched the early 90s vibe. But keeping up with teams like the Natural Disasters wasn't easy. Earthquake and Typhoon brought the kind of raw power that even Jim had to respect, leading to battles that shook rings across the country. The Beverly brothers provided a different kind of challenge. Bo and Blake Beverly were technically sound and loved to bend the rules when refs weren't looking. New Foundation's matches with them showed flashes of brilliance, moments where it seemed like Owen and Jim might capture the same magic that made the original Hart Foundation special. But wrestling's a funny business, and sometimes things just don't click the way you hope. Despite Owen's incredible talent and Jim's proven track record, the new foundation never quite caught fire like its predecessor. Chemistry was there, but the timing wasn't. When February 15th, 1992 rolled around, nobody knew they were watching the team's final match together. The new foundation's short run became one of wrestling's what-if stories. The pieces were all there: Owen's skill, Jim's power, their family connection, but sometimes even the most promising combinations need more than just talent to succeed. That final match marked not just the end of a team, but the close of another chapter in Jim's ever-evolving career in the squared circle. 1992 hit like a tornado backstage at WWF. When faced with a mandatory drug test, Jim made a choice that would change everything. The Anvil, known for his explosive power in the ring, let that same intensity spill over behind the scenes. The image of a television monitor flying through the air became his unexpected farewell to the company that had made him famous. But wrestlers don't stay down for long. Jim hit the independent scene like a man with something to prove. Small towns, high school gyms, anywhere there was a ring, and fans who wanted to see the Anvil in action. These weren't the big arenas he was used to, but they kept his skills sharp and his name alive in wrestling. 1993 brought new opportunities when WCW came calling. The company needed established stars, and Jim brought name value and real wrestling credentials. His matches with Sting showed he could hang with the best. The Stinger might have been WCW's franchise player. Jim gave him all he could handle, proving the Anvil wasn't just a tag team specialist. The feud with Rick Rude felt personal, like unfinished business from their WWF days. These weren't tag matches anymore. There was nowhere to hide and nobody to tag. Just two veterans trading moves and telling stories in the ring. Jim showed that his power game worked just as well in singles competition, even against one of wrestling's most technically gifted performers. This chapter in WCW painted a different picture of the Anvil. Without the Hart Foundation name or the pink and black gear, he stood on his own. Every power slam and every victory was his alone, proving that while tag team wrestling made him famous, it wasn't the only thing he could do. The man who once tossed anvils for money was now throwing his weight around in a new territory, writing his own story one match at a time. Back in the WWF, 1994 brought a twist nobody saw coming. The Anvil wasn't just back, he was back with a grudge. When he sided with Owen Hart against Bret, fans couldn't believe it. The man who'd been Bret's partner and brother-in-law was now standing against him, smirking alongside the younger Hart brother in one of wrestling's most personal feuds. King of the Ring became the stage for family drama turned violent. In one corner stood Bret and his loyal ally, the British Bulldog. In the other, Owen and Jim, former friends turned bitter enemies. The match wasn't just about winning, it was about family pride and betrayal. Every move carried extra weight, every taunt cut deeper, because these men knew each other so well. The Anvil showed a nastier side that night. Gone was the lovable powerhouse who dominated with Bret. In his place stood a meaner, more vicious version of Jim. He didn't just want to beat Bret, he wanted to hurt him. Each power move came with added spite, each taunt designed to get under the hitman's skin. Working as a heel against Bret brought out something new in Jim's performance. He knew all of Bret's moves, all his tendencies, and he used that knowledge against him. The same power game that had once backed up Bret's technical skills was now being used to tear him down. It wasn't just good wrestling, it was great storytelling. Wrestling runs on emotion, and this match had it in spades. The sight of Jim, once Bret's trusted partner, now trying to destroy him, added layers of drama that went beyond simple good guy versus bad guy. It proved the Anvil could play either side of the fence convincingly, making fans hate him just as easily as they'd once loved him. In 1997, wrestling caught fire in a way nobody expected. The Hart Foundation wasn't just back, they were different. Meaner, prouder. Standing tall with Canadian flags, they turned their backs on American fans while being heroes back home. Jim, once again alongside the Hart brothers, found himself in the middle of wrestling's hottest story. The crowd reactions were unlike anything before. In America, they were villains who dared to speak against the USA, but crossed the border into Canada, and they were national heroes. The Anvil and his partners didn't just get cheers in Canada, they got the kind of reception usually reserved for rock stars. Every appearance turned arenas into wild parties or riot scenes, depending on which side of the border they were on. July 6, 1997, Calgary. In Your House, Canadian Stampede. The stars aligned for one perfect night. In the ring stood some of wrestling's biggest names. Stone Cold Steve Austin, already becoming a legend. Ken Shamrock, the world's most dangerous man. The Legion of Doom, powerhouses who dominated for years. Goldust, one of wrestling's most unique characters. Against them, the Hart Foundation in their hometown. The Calgary crowd that night wasn't just hot, they were nuclear. Every move by Jim and his partners brought the house down. When the Anvil unleashed his power moves, the building shook. This wasn't just another match. It was a celebration of everything the Hart Foundation stood for, everything they'd built over the years. Nobody knew it then, but this would be Jim's last dance on the big stage. If you're going to take your final bow on pay-per-view, doing it in Calgary, with family, in front of fans who treated you like royalty, that's the way to do it. The Hart Foundation's victory that night wasn't just a win. It was the perfect ending to a story that had started years ago in Stu Hart's basement, coming full circle in the city where it all began. The spotlight's glow can be hard to leave behind, but Jim, the years after his in-ring career, told a darker story than any wrestling match. When the roar of the crowd fades and the ring ropes stop bouncing, some wrestlers find the silence deafening. The Anvil was one of them. Wrestling isn't kind to bodies or minds. Years of taking bumps, throwing power slams, and living life on the road had left their mark. The physical toll was only part of the story. Like many athletes, Jim struggled to find his place in a world that no longer revolved around match times and arena schedules. The rush of performing in front of thousands isn't easy to replace. September 6, 2010 wasn't just another date on the calendar, it became a stark reminder of how far a star could fall. The charges read like a prosecutor's worst-case scenario: drug possession with intent to distribute, trafficking, burglary, grand theft. The man who once tossed anvils for sport and held championship gold was now making headlines for all the wrong reasons. The arrest painted a picture no wrestling fan wanted to see. Each charge told part of a larger story about addiction, struggle, and the desperate measures some take when the cheers stop and reality sets in. Controlled substances had replaced the adrenaline of competition. The man who once broke into matches with perfectly timed moves was now accused of breaking into buildings. This chapter of Jim's life served as a painful reminder of wrestling's darker side, how the business could lift someone to incredible heights but offer little guidance for the descent. The same intensity that made him a star in the ring was now working against him outside it, turning the Anvil's post-wrestling journey into a cautionary tale about fame's fleeting nature and the challenges of finding purpose after the final bell. The gas station incident stripped away the glamour of wrestling fame, revealing a man fighting battles far tougher than any ring match. The Anvil, who once stared down wrestling's toughest competitors, now couldn't look away from his own demons. When police arrived, he didn't find the calculated professional wrestler. He found someone lost in a haze of pills and confusion. His legendary strength now turned to desperate aggression. The courtroom in March 2012 painted a different picture than the arenas he once commanded. Instead of thousands cheering his power moves, he faced a judge's stern gaze. 6 months in jail wasn't part of any wrestling script, and his outbursts during sentencing only dug the hole deeper. Contempt charge was like watching a man who couldn't help but go for the count-out loss. Yet in the darkness, a glimmer of his wrestling family's loyalty shone through. WWE, despite all the bridges that could have been burned, didn't turn its back on one of its own. They stepped up twice, funding rehabilitation programs to help their former champion find his way back. It wasn't just business, it was recognition that behind the character of the Anvil was a human being worth saving. Those rehab attempts told a different kind of wrestling story. not one of good guys versus bad guys, but of a real man trying to pin his own demons to the mat. Each stint represented a kick-out at 2.5, a refusal to let addiction score the final fall. Company that had given him his greatest triumphs, now trying to help him achieve his most important victory over himself. In these moments, wrestling's scripted drama gave way to raw reality. A man who'd once tossed anvils for show is now trying to lift the weight of his own struggles. For fans who remembered his power and glory, these headlines hit harder than any finishing move, reminding everyone that sometimes life's toughest matches happen outside the ring. Inside a quiet Florida home in the early hours of August 13th, 2018, wrestling's final bell rang for the Anvil. The scene his wife Elizabeth described to TMZ wasn't the explosive power moves fans remembered. Instead, it was hauntingly gentle. A simple trip to adjust the thermostat turned into wrestling's last unexpected twist. That odd dance-like movement Elizabeth saw wasn't part of any ring performance. Jim, who'd been taking medication for seizures, moved in a way that made his wife's heart stop. He hit the wall and dropped to the floor. She didn't hesitate. 911 call was immediate. Sometimes even the fastest responses aren't fast enough. The 4-inch gash they found told the cruel story of his final moments. The man who'd survived countless battles in the ring, been thrown around by wrestling's toughest competitors, taken down by a simple fall. At 63, the Anvil's strength couldn't save him from this last opponent. The revelation about early-stage Alzheimer's cast a shadow over even his final days. The disease that steals memories had been lurking, threatening to rob him of the very stories that made him a legend. County sheriffs ruled out foul play. That didn't make the loss any easier. Jim, father, husband, wrestler legend, had left the ring for the last time. No more anvil tosses, no more power slams, no more of that distinctive laugh that echoed through arenas. Just memories, frozen in time like photographs of a man who lived life as big as his in-ring presence. Hart legacy runs like a bright thread through wrestling's tapestry. Nowhere is it more visible than in Natalya's ring work. Every time she steps between the ropes, echoes of the Anvil live on. Same power game, those technical skills, even the way she carries herself. It's pure Hart dynasty, pure Jim spirit. Watch Natalya wrestle and you'll catch glimpses of her father. When she locks in the sharpshooter, she's not just using her Uncle Bret's move. She's honoring a family tradition that Jim helped build. The pink and black gear isn't just a fashion choice, it's a living tribute to the Hart Foundation's glory days. And her dad and uncle changed tag team wrestling forever. But it goes deeper than moves and colors. Natalya brings that same blend of power and precision that made her father special. She can throw opponents around the ring with anvil-like strength, then switch to technical wrestling that would make the Hart Dungeon proud. Like watching wrestling history evolve in real time, next generation Jim adding new chapters to the family story. In WWE's women's division, Natalya stands out not just for her skill, but her connection to wrestling royalty. Every time announcers mention her father or the Hart Foundation, keeping the Anvil's memory alive. Struggles later in life don't diminish what he built. They just make the story more human, more real. Through Natalya, Jim's influence on wrestling never really ended, it just transformed. The powerhouse who once tossed anvils for sport lives on through his daughter's power slams. The proud Hart Foundation member's spirit shows in every pink and black outfit she wears. The legacy of the Anvil didn't end on that August morning in 2018. It just found a new way to shine in the squared circle. Through the lens of cold statistics, Jim's career looks impressive enough. Those tag team titles, those headlining matches spanning decades. But wrestling isn't about numbers. It's about moments that stick in fans' memories, and the Anvil created plenty of those. That laugh, you can still hear it if you close your eyes. It wasn't just a character trait, it was Jim's exclamation point on every promo, every victory, every moment of triumph. In a business full of larger-than-life characters, he managed to stand out without needing fancy gimmicks. Just raw power, natural charisma, and that unforgettable laugh. Think back to WrestleMania 6, when victory came calling, or those legendary Hart Foundation matches rewrote what tag team wrestling could be. Each power slam, each devastating move told the story of a man who'd gone from tossing anvils at the Calgary Stampede to tossing opponents in wrestling's biggest venues. Jim's story isn't just about wrestling glory, it's about human struggle too. When the spotlight dims and the crowds go home, when the roar of thousands turns to silence, that's when some of life's toughest matches begin. His battles outside the ring remind us that even our heroes fight private wars we never see. From the Hart Dungeon to WWE stardom, from triumph to tragedy, Anvil's journey mirrors wrestling itself. Spectacular, dramatic, sometimes glorious, sometimes heartbreaking. His daughter Natalia carries his legacy forward now, proof that the stories we write in the ring can echo long after we're gone. Don't miss our documentary on Rick Rude and how his final match led to his tragic end. Like and subscribe for 100 years of luck. Until next time.